Some secrets stay buried for a reason. But once you hear them, you can't unhear them. These stories weren't lost, they were hidden. And maybe the real horror is how close they came to disappearing forever. If you made it this far, remember, not all history was meant to survive. But now that you know, what will you do with it? The blizzard had swallowed the mountains again. February 3, 1943. Somewhere in Nordland, Norway, a team of 5 Allied operatives parachuted into the dark, frozen wilderness under radio silence. They were the untraceable hand of sabotage, Operation Nightshade. Their target, the Vemork hydroelectric plant, the heart of Nazi Germany's heavy water production, essential for the nuclear weapons program. What followed became legend. But the details, shrouded in secrecy and death, remained buried in snow. Captain Alistair Whitcomb, a British officer and demolition expert, led the unit. Alongside him, Miriam Graves, American signals analyst and cryptographer, Eric Thorson, a Norwegian local and guide, Private Jack Urev, an ex-con turned saboteur from Chicago, and Luc Moreau, a French-Algerian marksman. Each had a specialty. Each had reasons to be there. But not all of them would return. Their drop zone was off by 6 kilometers, forcing them to navigate the terrain while avoiding Wehrmacht patrols. For 2 days, they trudged through thick snow and unrelenting wind, narrowly evading capture. Eric, drawing on his childhood in the region, led them to an abandoned Sami shelter buried near the Treeline. That became their base of operations. They worked silently, burying their footprints, using coded signals to communicate. Miriam kept to her radio, intercepting German transmissions and decoding supply movements. One night, she cracked a courier message confirming an SS convoy transporting deuterium oxide barrels within the next 72 hours. They had their window. The plan was simple: disable the rail line with timed explosives, detour the convoy through a gorge, then trigger an avalanche to bury it forever. But even simple plans unravel. On the night of February 6th, Jack disappeared. He had taken first watch and vanished without a sound. At first, they assumed capture. But there was no sign of struggle. His tracks vanished 30 yards from camp. Alistair ruled out desertion. Jack had nowhere to go and too much to lose. Miriam, quieter than usual, tapped at her notes with trembling fingers. The mission pressed on. On February 8th, they rigged the charges along the cliffside. As they finished wiring the detonators, Luke spotted 2 figures in German gear approaching fast. They dove for cover. But it wasn't the enemy, it was Jack. And he wasn't alone. The second figure was SS Hauptmann Dieter Weiss. Miriam froze. Alistair raised his pistol. Jack spoke first, hands raised. "He's not what you think," he said. "He's a defector. He gave us this." He handed Miriam a black leather journal. Inside were troop movements, cipher keys, and a map of underground storage beneath Vemork. Pages of evidence proving the Germans had accelerated their nuclear program. More than sabotage, this was intelligence gold. But something didn't sit right with Eric. "Why would an SS officer just hand this over?" he asked. Weiss spoke in clipped, tired English. "Because I no longer wish to be part of this madness," he said. "The Führer will burn the world to keep his illusions. I will not help him build the match." Alistair made the call. They would complete the mission, then exfiltrate with Weiss. That night, the avalanche trap was sprung. The SS convoy, as predicted, was buried beneath tons of ice and stone. A brilliant success, at the cost of being hunted across every ridge in the region. But fate would not allow an easy escape. At the extraction rendezvous, coordinates transmitted 3 days prior, only a smoldering wreck greeted them. Their supply crate destroyed, the snow black with fuel. A torn piece of Miriam's signal flag lay buried in the ice. A message. Someone knew. That night, Luke was found dead. No bullet wound. No struggle. Just frozen in place, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. Miriam, already sleep-deprived and anxious, stared at the others with wide, red-rimmed eyes. Alistair interrogated Weiss. "What did you tell them?" he demanded. "Did you give them our code?" Weiss swore innocence. "I've told you everything I know." Paranoia splintered the group. Alistair barely slept. Eric scouted for days and returned empty-handed. Jack and Miriam began to argue over leadership. Every footstep echoed like betrayal. February 15th, Eric vanished. No tracks, no signs of struggle. Just gone. The forest seemed to consume them, one by one. Finally, in a last desperate attempt, Miriam repaired the radio. Through fragments of static, she caught a weak signal: hold until extraction. March 1st, Glacier Pass. On February 28th, Jack was shot in the back of the head. The team had been down to 3. Miriam said he tried to run. Alistair said she'd snapped. Only Weiss and Miriam made it to Glacier Pass. But no plane came. For 2 days, they waited in silence, rationing snow and root scraps. Then, March 2nd, just before sunrise, a single British Lysander touched down on the edge of the frozen ridge. Only Miriam climbed aboard. Weiss stayed behind, refusing to speak. When the plane returned to England, Miriam collapsed from hypothermia and malnutrition. 4 months, she didn't speak. The journal disappeared somewhere in MI6's vaults. Her debriefing was classified, redacted, sealed for decades. It wasn't until 1952 that she was seen again, this time in a rural Scottish village. She had no memory of the events, just dreams. She painted cryptic scenes: a train burning in snow, a man with no face, a cliffside grave beneath pine trees. Years later, a private investigator found the burial site she painted. Inside, 5 skeletons, all unmarked. None matched Miriam's dental records. To this day, some believe Miriam Graves died in Norway, and the woman who returned was a fabricated identity. Others believe Operation Nightshade was a cover for something else, an internal purge, a silent war within the shadows of World War II. The journal remains lost. The truth lies beneath the snow. In the ashes of war, music echoed where words failed. Smolensk, 1942, once a thriving city on the western edge of the Soviet Union, now lay in ruins under Nazi occupation. Buildings crumbled, streets were cracked with fire, and silence reigned. But from a dim concert hall deep in the heart of the city came the gentle sound of a piano, and with it, a rebellion no one expected. Elena Markova was 29 years old when the Germans arrived. A renowned concert pianist before the war, she had studied in Moscow and Paris, sharing stages with some of Europe's greatest talents. Her hands, fragile yet fierce, had once moved audiences to tears. But the war changed everything. Her husband, a Red Army officer, was killed during the initial assault on Smolensk. Her family home was seized. And still, she stayed. When the Nazi officers took the Smolensk Conservatory for their leisure quarters, they found Elena there, seated silently before a dust-covered grand piano. A German major, Karl Brecht, recognized her from a concert in Berlin years before. "You should play again," he said with a cold smile. "You can be useful." The Germans needed culture, even in conquest. And so, under the flickering lights of a ruined hall, Elena began to perform again. Every Thursday night, she played for the German officers, the finest pieces of Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. But something began to change. Her tempos shifted. Her rhythms became erratic. There were patterns hidden in the melody. At first unnoticed, until whispers began among Soviet partisans in the forests outside the city. Elena had joined the resistance. She met with Dmitry Kovalenko, a former librarian turned resistance courier. The two began to work together on a daring method of communication, embedding Morse code within her musical phrasing. She used changes in tempo, unnatural pauses, and coded motifs to pass information to resistance members who slipped into the concerts dressed as staff, servants, or guests. A sudden accelerondo in Chopin's Nocturne? German munitions train arriving Friday. A repeated G minor motif in Rachmaninoff's Prelude? Nazi patrol shift change. To the casual ear, it was just music. To the trained partisan, it was a broadcast. They called her the piano voice. Her concerts became the most important 45 minutes in the city. Resistance members risked their lives to attend, memorize the message, and flee before curfew. Every week, Elena composed a new piece or reinterpreted a classic. Her mind became a battlefield of notes and codes. But the Nazis were not fools. Major Brecht grew suspicious. He had noticed the strange way certain men would stare too intently, listen too closely. One evening, he sat beside Elena after her performance. "You play differently now," he said. "Less emotion, more precision." Elena offered only a tired smile. War makes the soul mechanical. Brecht did not smile back. By January 1943, the Gestapo had arrived in Smolensk. Elena's movements were watched. The resistance knew she was a marked woman. Dmitri begged her to stop. "We can find another way. Leave the city. Come with us." But Elena refused. "As long as I play," she said, "we speak." That winter, an urgent message came from Moscow. The Germans were planning a large-scale push toward Kursk. If true, thousands of Soviet lives were at risk. But confirmation required intelligence from Smolensk. Elena agreed to relay the message at her next performance. It was a frigid Thursday. The hall was crowded. Brecht sat in the front row. Elena wore a dark red dress, her hair pinned with trembling hands. She sat at the piano and began to play her own composition, a haunting, slow piece that grew bolder with every measure. Each section encoded locations, dates, and deployment sizes. Every crescendo was a cry for help. She had never played so fiercely. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, the clapping began. But Brecht did not applaud. He stood, walked toward her. "Who taught you this piece?" he asked. "I wrote it," she replied. He stared at her. No composer could write this without a reason. That night, the Gestapo arrested her. She was taken to the basement of the Smolensk command post. Interrogated, beaten, deprived of sleep. They demanded the names of her contacts. She gave none. Only silence and the ghost of a melody that would not leave her lips. But her final concert had worked. The resistance had decoded her warning. Soviet forces reinforced the Kursk lines in time to prevent disaster. Elena had saved lives, thousands of them. After 3 weeks, she was moved to a prison transport bound for Minsk. But the train never arrived. It was ambushed by partisans in the forest. All records state that Elena Markova died that night, caught in crossfire during the raid. But rumors spread. A woman matching her description was seen months later in a Belarusian monastery. Others claimed she fled to Finland, living under a false name, teaching piano to orphaned children. In 1956, a sealed letter arrived at the Moscow Conservatory. Inside, sheet music, handwritten. The title read, "For Silence in Winter." The notes were coded, though no one at the time could decipher them. Only recently did music historians decode its message. You can silence a song, but not its echo. Her piano was found in the ruins of the Smolensk Conservatory, miraculously intact. It now sits in a museum, untouched, except once each year, when on February 12, a young pianist plays "For Silence in Winter," in memory of a woman who turned resistance into art. They called it the White Hollow, a stretch of dense alpine forest along the border of northern Italy and Austria. Locals avoided it even before the war. Hunters spoke of sudden fog, eerie echoes, and trees that moved when no wind blew. In March 1945, as the Axis powers crumbled and retreat became the only command, the 118th Waffen-SS Alpine Battalion vanished there. It began as a routine redeployment. Intelligence suggested Yugoslav partisans were preparing a final push into German-held territory from the southeast. The 118th, an elite mountain unit composed of hardened veterans and young conscripts, was ordered to reinforce defensive lines near the Tarvisio Pass. 212 soldiers, 7 officers, and 1 radio technician departed from Udina under cloudy skies. They were expected to reach their post within 2 days. They never arrived. The first sign that something was wrong came from a supply convoy following a day behind them. When they reached the base of the White Hollow, the path ahead was blocked by fallen trees, unnaturally placed, as if constructed to barricade passage. Tracks from the battalion were visible leading in, but none came out. The commanding officer of the supply convoy, Captain Franz Keitel, ordered a reconnaissance team to proceed. They returned after only 1 hour, pale and shaken. "There's nothing," one soldier stammered. "No bodies. No tracks. Just silence. And snow that whispers." SS headquarters in Vienna dismissed the report as partisan ambush or desertion. But whispers spread. Survivors from surrounding units told strange tales of distorted echoes, lights flickering in the fog, voices in the trees calling by name. Then came the journal. In 1954, a post-war recovery crew, sent to survey former battlefield sites, found a rusted metal case buried beneath roots near Tarvisio. Inside, a torn journal, identified as belonging to Oberleutnant Hans Roos, second in command of the 118th. Much of it was unreadable, water-damaged and ink-blurred. But fragments remained. March 17th. We passed into the White Hollow. No sun. Trees seem wrong, dense, unnatural. March 18th. Peterson swears he saw a girl in the snow, barefoot, smiling. We lost him an hour later. No blood, just his rifle. March 19th. The fog returns every evening. I cannot see my own hands at night. We've stopped lighting fires. They seem to attract something. March 20th. We found Stoller hanging from a branch, too high for a man to climb. His mouth was sewn shut. March 21st. The men are falling apart. Some speak of a curse. Others of Slavic spirits, forest witches. I just want the sun back. March 22nd. The radio is dead. Gunter swears he heard it playing a lullaby. There was no power. March 23rd. I saw them. They're not partisans. The final entry, a shaky scrawl, hardly legible. We were not supposed to come here. The trees remember. Soviet and Allied investigators reviewed the area after the war. No mass graves. No bones. No rusted weapons. Just hundreds of trees, too symmetrical, too quiet. Locals who had fled the region during the war returned and told investigators of old legends, long buried beneath Christian silence. In Slavic folklore, the White Hollow was once believed to be the home of Leshai, forest spirits who lured the wicked to their deaths, punishing those who disrespected the land. In wartime, stories merged. Villagers claimed the forest took vengeance on invaders, Nazi or otherwise. One peasant woman, Maria Danik, claimed her grandfather saw men walking into the woods with guns and hate, and never walking out. Skeptics point to more practical theories. The battalion was ambushed by partisans and buried in a hidden ravine, or, in desperation, they turned on each other, mutiny and madness under cold and fear. But those who studied the terrain found no sign of struggle, no shell casings, no battle remains. Just trees. Towering. Watching. In 1972, an Italian hiker claimed he found a rusted SS helmet nailed to a tree in the White Hollow, with strange carvings around it, symbols not of military origin. He took a photograph, which circulated in fringe journals, but when a search team returned, the tree was gone. The story found new life in the Cold War. Soviet propagandists twisted the tale to highlight Nazi cowardice and divine punishment, while Western conspiracy circles began speculating that the 118th encountered a time anomaly, a dimensional tear, or even extraterrestrial forces. In 1999, a declassified British intelligence report referenced psychological anomalies near Tarvisio. One excerpt read, personnel exposed to overnight bivouac in the forest reported shared dreams, distorted perception of time, and hearing voices in their native language calling from the woods. The area was marked unsuitable for further stationing. Today, hikers still avoid the White Hollow. GPS devices malfunction near its center. No wildlife is seen within its bounds. And no official memorial exists for the 118th Waffen-SS Alpine Battalion. What remains are stories. The crackle of phantom radios in the mist. The sound of boots crunching snow with no source. And the feeling, shared by all who visit, that someone, or something, is still watching from the trees. In the final years of World War II, Allied troops huddled around shortwave radios in the Pacific jungles, listening to soft female voices broadcast from Tokyo. "Hello boys," they'd coo in perfect English, laced with bittersweet piano music. These voices became legends. Tokyo Rose, the name given to the sirens of Japan's psychological warfare. But behind the most infamous voice was another, unseen, unheard, and erased from history. Until now. David Kim was born in Los Angeles in 1918. The son of Korean immigrants, he was fluent in English, Japanese, and Korean by the age of 10. Raised in a neighborhood that straddled identities, David always lived between worlds. His father wanted him to become a doctor. David wanted to write radio plays. He found work in the backrooms of a local station before the war interrupted everything. After Pearl Harbor, David and his family were rounded up and sent to Manzanar internment camp. Bitter and disillusioned, he volunteered for relocation when Japanese recruiters sought bilinguals for civilian radio work. "You want to go back to the land of your ancestors?" the recruiter asked. "Here you're just another number." Within weeks, David found himself on a ship bound for Japan, a prisoner in practice, if not in name. In Tokyo, he was brought to NHK's Radio Tokyo division, where a blend of Japanese propagandists, captured Allied POWs, and foreign-born broadcasters produced nightly psychological operations. Among them was Iva Toguri, the woman most famously, and unfairly, branded Tokyo Rose. But while Iva sat behind the microphone, reading scripted lines and playing Western jazz records, David was the man behind the glass. Writing, directing, twisting language into a weapon. He knew what would sting the soldiers the most, not threats, but memories. Home. Family. He scripted messages like, "Hey Joe from Brooklyn. Your girl's gone dancing with another man. You sure this jungle's worth it?" It wasn't just propaganda, it was theater. And David was its ghostwriter. But as time passed, he changed the game. In late 1944, David began embedding hidden messages in broadcasts, just enough nuance to pass unnoticed by censors. He'd drop hints about naval movements, POW morale, or sabotage opportunities. A slight inflection in a phrase. A song chosen not for mood, but for Morse code embedded in the rhythm. His code name became the Second Voice. A U.S. intelligence officer, Captain Lyle Merriman, first noticed the pattern. Listening to a broadcast during downtime, he caught something odd. The phrasing. "The rain is falling, but the sun will rise over Tulagi." He recognized it from a codebook. The sentence contained a prearranged signal used in Operation Ghostwire, a sabotage mission targeting a Japanese airstrip. David had flipped sides. Working under the noses of Japanese censors, he had become a double agent, not through weapons, but through words. It was risky. One wrong tone, one suspect song, and he'd be executed as a spy. He slept in a tiny room in the broadcasting house, ate alone, and avoided contact with other staff. Iva never knew. She thought he was just another writer, quiet, tired, and broken by the war. In January 1945, he pushed further. His masterpiece was a series of broadcasts that aired over 2 weeks, each framed as harmless monologues, read in the soothing voice of Tokyo Rose. But together, they painted a coded picture: the placement of fuel depots near Iwo Jima, the vulnerability of a radio relay station on Saipan, and critical morale data from a POW camp. It worked. Allied forces targeted the locations with surgical precision. Lives were saved. But then came betrayal. A translator, Satoshi Nakai, noticed inconsistencies in David's scripts. Phrases that didn't match Japanese intent. Songs chosen that were banned from internal playlists. Nakai reported it. David was arrested within 24 hours. Dragged into an interrogation room beneath the broadcasting building, he was beaten and accused of espionage. He said nothing. Only one man came to visit him, Major Hiroshi Tanaka, head of psychological operations. He offered a deal: confess, and he would live. Remain silent, and he would disappear. David chose silence. But fate intervened. On March 10, 1945, U.S. firebombing raids struck Tokyo. Amid the chaos, the prison building was hit. David escaped, half-burned and delirious, crawling through ash and broken glass. A Buddhist monk found him days later, hiding in a temple, and smuggled him north under a false name. He survived the war. When the U.S. occupation began, he emerged, unrecognizable, with forged papers and a limp from his injuries. He disappeared into the ruins of Yokohama, where he lived as a street teacher, offering free English lessons to orphans and widows. Meanwhile, Iva Taguri was arrested and put on trial in the United States. Despite no concrete evidence, she was convicted of treason. David watched the trial from afar, torn between guilt and survival. His testimony could have exonerated her, but it would have exposed him to U.S. prosecution and Japanese retribution. So he said nothing. Decades passed. In 1989, a package arrived at the Smithsonian Institution. Inside, a collection of typed radio scripts, annotated in both Japanese and English. A letter, unsigned, said simply, "*, the second voice was never silent. He just spoke in another frequency. *. The handwriting matched David Kim's. His name was never officially recorded. His service never recognized. But in those scripts, hidden between jazz songs and soft voices, lived the proof of a man who fought a war not with bullets, but syllables. He died in 1994. Alone. Anonymous. A hero in the static. February 13, 1945. Dresden, once called the Florence of the Elbe, was burning. Allied bombers had unleashed a storm of fire and ash unlike anything Germany had seen. The sky was orange. The air itself roared. People melted into shadows against brick walls. In the midst of this apocalypse, a train left the city. It was not a military transport. Not a train of generals or soldiers. It was a patched-together string of cars, some passenger, some freight, carrying wounded civilians, orphans, and the terminally ill. No orders sanctioned it. No schedule recorded it. It existed because one man refused to leave the dying behind. Station Master Gerhard Lutz had served trains for 32 years. He was not a soldier. He was not a party member. He was a man who knew the rhythm of engines, the patience of steel. And on that night, as the sirens howled and the first wave of bombers approached, he made a choice. He entered the station house basement, found his old set of keys, and unlocked the southern yard. He moved from car to car, calling out into the smoke, "If you can walk, climb aboard. If you can carry someone, do it now." Children, old men, the sick and the mad, anyone who reached him, he loaded onto the train. His daughter, Lotte, just 13, begged him to wait for her mother. "She went to the bakery," she cried. Gerhard looked into the black sky and kissed her forehead. "She'll find us. We must move." He powered up the locomotive himself, a Class 50 steam engine already damaged from a previous air raid. The boiler hissed in protest. Steel clanged as the engine coughed to life. With one hand on the throttle and another holding Lotte's trembling fingers, Gerhard pulled the train from the inferno. Behind him, Dresden died. As they moved east, smoke chased them. Fires lit the hills. Bombers circled like vultures. Gerhard's goal was Gorlitz, near the Polish border, safe territory, or at least not yet swallowed by war. It was a 2-hour journey in peace. It would take them 2 days. The train stopped often. Tracks were buckled from previous bombings. Bridges were gone. He navigated by feel, memory, and faith. At one village, Soviet scouts fired at the engine before realizing who it carried. At another, SS officers tried to board and commandeer the train. Gerhard refused. "This train carries no orders," he said. "Only the dying." They let him pass. On the second night, they reached a frozen embankment. The rail ahead was blocked by a derailed freight car. Gerhard, hands blistered, teeth chattering, climbed down with 3 passengers and cleared it by lantern light. It took hours. Inside the cars, people huddled in silence. A boy died of burns. A woman gave birth to twins. Lotte moved from cabin to cabin with a kettle of snow-melted water, holding each child's hand and whispering, "We're still moving." Somewhere outside Botzen, the boiler cracked. The engine began to fail. The water tanks had frozen over. Gerhard slowed the train and walked the length of the cars. He stared at the huddled faces, the soot-covered cheeks, the eyes full of sleep and sorrow. Then he climbed onto the roof of the engine, tore loose a section of the tarpaulin, and began melting snow with a broken lamp to refill the tanks. By morning, they reached Gorlitz. The station was nearly deserted. A single medic team met them. One officer said, "This train isn't on the manifest." "Who authorized this?" Gerhard didn't answer. He collapsed on the platform, one arm still cradling Lotte's shoulder. Of the 87 passengers who boarded in Dresden, only 19 survived 2 of the month. Wounds, hypothermia, starvation. But they told the story. In post-war East Germany, the tale of the last train was suppressed. Gerhard had refused orders, defied party protocol, and saved civilians when the Reich demanded abandonment. He died in 1946 from radiation exposure. His time spent repairing lines had unknowingly placed him near bombed uranium cargo. In 1991, after reunification, a journalist named Petra Stein uncovered fragments of the story in Dresden's local archives. She tracked down Lotte, now living in a quiet Berlin apartment. Her hands still bore the scars of that journey. She had never spoken of it before. Petra published the article. It spread. Survivors stepped forward. They described the soft voice of the old man who drove the train, his sleeves always rolled up, his hat always tilted forward. One called him a conductor on the tracks to heaven. In 2007, a bronze plaque was placed at the Dresden Hauptbahnhof. It reads, "In memory of those who fled not from fear, but for love. To the man who made a train move when the world stopped. Gerhard Lutz. Station master. Father. Human being. The engine itself was never found. Some say it rusted in a rail yard, dismantled for scrap. Others say it was buried in a snowbank during the retreat and still waits under the ice, holding stories in its rusted bones. But for the ones who rode it, the train still moves, across dreams, through fire, into light. Some stories end with peace. These don't. They linger, half-glimpsed, half-buried, etched in the margins of history where no one dares to look. If you feel unsettled, good. That means you've heard what they never wanted remembered. Share this before it disappears again, because silence is how these stories were buried the first time.